All right, the name of the book is called Journey to Joy: From Spiritual Rigidity to Freedom, a spiritual autobiography, and it's in its second edition. We have Louise Rauckhorst with us, and her husband wrote this book, and she contributed to it, her husband, Ronald. And it's so interesting because I think for people listening to this, sometimes you got to kind of check yourself. Is there a way to become more open? And Louise would certainly know. They were married for a very, very long time. Louise, thanks for coming on. And what made Ronald want to put this together?
I think he just wanted to share how his life he had transitioned from being a very rigid, judgmental thinker, black and white thinker, because of the way he was brought up in a very traditional Roman Catholic family of German descent in Akron, Ohio. Where there was it was pre-Vatican II, and it was a lot of focus on sin, and guilt and what have you, and kind of fear of the secular world. So he felt from very early age impelled to even make a private vow to become a priest. But I think he wanted to show how through his life transitions, he had become a more open, not judgmental, loving person, able to tolerate doubt, really, that doubt is fine, and that your beliefs may change, but that doesn't mean your relationship with God changes. That will always be there. And that's what he believes, that's what faith is, as contrasted with belief, which is about dogma and such.
What's so interesting, and people will find so interesting too, is you talk about, what he grew up with and then becoming a priest, and you were a nun. And so people automatically think, wow, how did they get together? And you had the bond of having the same religious beliefs, but what was that like? What was your love story like?
Well, I had been in the community, the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul, for 17 years. And for both of us, I think Vatican II had a big impact in the teachings that came out of Vatican II, sort of a new way of looking at church, at looking at our role in the church and such. And I think we both felt like the situations we were in, we weren't able to grow, and that it was time to move out into a different way of living. It just happened that he had decided just a few months before to ask for permanent laicization, or permanently to be out of the at least the church approved priesthood, and I had just been about a month having left my community when a wedding of friends brought us together in Boston very unexpectedly. I really feel like in some mysterious way we were saved for each other, because the possibility of our meeting what seemed so absurd, because at the time he was living in New York City, I was in Boston, and he, after he left, he then was free, if he cared to have relationships with women, to marry. So he was kind of thinking that, well, he didn't want to marry a nurse, a teacher, or an ex-nun, because they were all too bossy. So when we were seated together after our friend's wedding and he was getting to know me, well, what are you doing? I'm, now that you've left the community, well, I'm teaching at Boston College, as I was before. And well, what are you teaching? Nursing. And oh my goodness, there were his triple bossiness right there. But anyway, it didn't matter anymore, because right away we sort of it was sort of a trust and a being on the same wavelength. I was very comfortable with him and felt like he was a very sincere, honest individual, and so our relationship, developed, and within 7 months we were married.
Wow. And you go on for 50 years. You just lost Ronald, who you called Al. A lot of family members called him Al a couple of years ago. But what a wonderful life together. And what's also so interesting is because, and he talks about this in the book, he spent 10 years as a missionary priest in South Korea. And then you talk about Vatican II and the changes, and then what opened him up and the ways he started to think about faith and life purpose. He meets you, you get married, follow this people. This is a great love story. And then children, you adopt two wonderful Korean daughters. What was that like for you and Ronald, aka Al?
Well, that was one of the most important turning points in our life, becoming instant parents of a 6.5-year-old and 11-year-old girls. We were married 10 years, and I had a fellowship that brought me to the University of Maryland, Maryland in Baltimore, and we got this flyers for family building through adoption. So we said, well, not to decide is to decide. If we are going to, adopt, let's go and see. So we had various classes, were very interesting. But the one that really blew our mind was a class by a teacher in a community college in Baltimore area who had adopted about 5 or 6 children with disabilities, and she was blind. She had a baby, but her mother, and she had her 90-year-old mother who could see to measure the formula for the baby. And we just looked at each other. And if this woman can, adopt a family like that, how can we say we can't? So, because of our age, we felt like, and because of my professional involvements, we couldn't really adopt a baby, and we were not likely probably to be offered a baby anyway. So then also for American adoptions, we didn't feel at that point in time that we could adopt a child or children with disabilities, et cetera, because we had so much we had to catch up with in our own lives, having just left starting out our career almost, in our late 30s, after leaving our community. So anyway, and
it all worked out. I mean, you have these beautiful daughters, and he talks about it, and you talk about it really in the book. You give really wonderful descriptions of what happened, and that it was a real life ethical dilemma, as you described, because he's 38, you're 36, you wanted children, but, what you were doing, the dangers of pregnancy for an older woman. And then you have these great kids you adopt that make the family complete. And that's what you told me in the off-air conversation. And what was that like to bring the two girls up and to bring, have them come into your home, and now they're just like they could be your natural daughters?
Well, we decided, to adopt a Korean child if we could. And after we started the process, we were very quickly offered these two girls who had been living with their families and weren't able to continue to take care of them. So they had been temporarily placed in an orphanage in Seoul, for the purposes of, preparing for adoption. So when we got their pictures, we said, right away, yes, we'll adopt them. So when they came, it was, they were, I think, thinking that, they were coming to be adopted by rich Americans. And of course we weren't, but we shared enough with them anyway. We had a little rocky period at times with the older girl, Anne, because, she missed her grandmother and she'd weep and wail for her grandmother, et cetera. But we bonded a few months later when we had moved from Maryland back up to Massachusetts. And, they were put in school, and they had a teacher that helped them to learn English as a second language. And that they only knew their mommy and daddy and their ABCs in English. So that was a big, challenge for them to learn English and sort of get used to the American culture. But anyway, they're very grateful because they understand how different their life would have been if they had stayed living down country in South Korea.
Wow. Wow. What a wonderful story. And there's so many stories like this in the book. The
Yes.
journey, exactly. Journey to Joy from Spiritual Rigidity to Freedom, a spiritual autobiography. And like I said, it's the second edition. And Louise, big part of that contributor. And of course, Ronald Rauckhorst as well. You can get the book on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. Louise, thanks so much for coming on.
Well, I really enjoyed speaking with you, and I always loved talking about my husband and his book because I do think he had a great message to share with people.
Visit us at www.greatwritersmedia.com. Email us at info@greatwritersmedia.com or call us at +1 877 556